Welcome to the High Adventure Scouting Podcast. This is the source for all things high adventure for scouts, scouters, and anyone else interested in promoting high adventure trips for our youth. You can find all kinds of great high adventure options for your scouts at highadventurescouting.com. We are constantly updating the list of cool trips, and we want your input on your best trip. Welcome, high adventure enthusiasts. We are excited, as always, to highlight a high adventure trip on this edition of the High Adventure Scouting Podcast. Now, today we're joined by two great scouters, Greg Gunyon and Wes Wexell. Both Greg and Wes are a part of Troop 40 in Shiloh, Illinois, just down the street from me, literally. And I've known both of these scouters for some time, and it's a pleasure to have them on the podcast today. Greg and Wes, thanks for joining us today on the High Adventure Scouting Podcast.
Happy to be here today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about this subject. So, the purpose of this podcast is to give listeners some information about your most recent trip to the Boundary Waters. Now, there are plenty of units around the country going to the Boundary Waters of Minnesota, and I think this is going to be a popular episode. Now, for those of you who don't know, I creep on Troop 40's Facebook page because I'm a member of that, and I saw that they were in the North Country, and I love the approach they took to this trip. It was a little different than most of the Boundary Water trips I've heard about. So now, obviously, you and your troop members wanted to take a trip to the Boundary Water, so I'm curious how you plan the trip, if you use an outfitter, cost, any other pertinent details, and I'm just going to sit back and listen to you guys and interject because I'm real curious on how you did this.
I guess we should kind of start out with just kind of giving people a rough idea of what Boundary Waters is. For those of you that don't know, it's basically 1 million acres of protected land on the border of U.S. and Canada. And what makes it different than any other campsite is that you've got permitted entry points. So if you want to go into Boundary Waters, you fill out an application for a permit, pay the small fee, and you're allowed to enter in on a specific date, but you have to enter at a specific entry point. It helps control the traffic going into those areas. And then once you're in, you're allowed a group of up to 9 people, up to a total of 4 boats. And you're basically just paddling all the way across a lake. And then you put that boat on your shoulders and you walk a trail to the next lake. And you can just keep going. So whereas at a local camp, you might have an opportunity for 1 or maybe even 2 lakes. And sure, you could connect them if you wanted to. You're never really completely getting away. As you approach Boundary Waters, you get to about that last 1 hour of driving and your GPS on the dashboard starts dipping out because the cell phone signal's getting weak. And you just know you're in for an awesome time when the cell phone signal starts dipping out.
Exactly.
You had mentioned using an outfitter, and there's 3 basic ways to do it. You could either self-outfit, and that's only for the most hardcore individuals that are absolutely positive and sure that they've got everything that they need. Do you have the right boats? Do you have the right tents? Just as important, do you have a way to get everything you need up there in a timely fashion? Other people, just like we did, we just wanted to rent the boats. The boats cost a couple $1,000s, and what makes them so great is that they are so thin you can see sunlight through them, but they're extremely strong. They're made with Kevlar and materials that are used in bulletproof vests, but they only weigh about 40 pounds compared to a boat that would weigh about 80 pounds in other materials.
Exactly. That's the kind of boats we took when we went out there 4 years ago, and they're a lot lighter than the traditional aluminum canoes. So, before we jump into that, before we started talking, recording, Wes was mentioning a planning process. So let's go back to that point and how you got to get the boys to start thinking about this kind of trip, and kind of move on from there and how things were planned. That would be a really good way to start kind of the planning process.
Yes. So I have to give props to Greg there. We've not done a high adventure trip since anybody currently in the troop was in the troop. So nobody in the troop has ever done a high adventure. And the ones who did it before we joined the troop had done it with other units, like not really Troop 40 doing it. And so Greg really said, you know what, I've been to Boundary Waters. I know how this works. We need to go. We need to just do it. We just need to make it happen. He put kind of a really rough larger idea together, presented it to the committee, and said, "Hey, can I present this to the families at an upcoming court of honor, and get interest to find out if we even have enough interest to make this work?" And I think that pre-planning, that here's a rough idea, here's what we think would work, and being able to present that to families, not just specifically boys, and definitely not just the PLC, but present it to families and go, is this something that you would want to do? I think made a huge difference and got the ball rolling. Then we got interest. Then we got people to sign up and say they were going to go. We got scouts to sign up and some additional adults to sign up, and everybody saying, yes, we want to go. Yes, we're going to put our money down. And then we started having monthly meetings to make it happen. Greg led the first ones because he knew what was going on, and he shared a lot of information. It was really awesome. And then over time, the individual crews kind of broke into their own sessions and did what they needed to do to finish their planning up.
Well, that's kind of the way you have to
how much
do it.
work went into all that planning stuff. I mean, yeah, we started a year before we even took that trip.
Yeah, that's kind of how you have to do it. You have to. There's a lot of planning involved, a lot of paying money, budgeting those things out, getting canoes reserved, getting food together, all that. So that's a good starter. And Greg, I'm glad you kind of described the Boundary Waters for those who don't know about it. It's an awesome place. Again, if you want to use your cell phone, forget about it. you get away from everything electronic, because there's no signal. So, well, jump right in. Tell me, you said you mentioned you rented the canoes. What process did you guys go by to figure out whether you wanted to use a full outfitter or just canoes, or just provide your own food, that kind of stuff? So I'm curious about the logistics of how you got this taken care of.
Well, one of the first things you need to decide when you're planning a Boundary Waters trip is, do you want to go over on the east side, or do you want to go over on the west side? A lot of times when you hear about Boundary Waters, you'll hear a town mentioned called Ely, and Ely is over on the west side of things. If you go over in there, you're going to find a lot more water that's moving in one direction as opposed to lakes that are mostly stable. So you're going to find more waterfalls, and you're going to have to make sure you're planning your route so that you're not paddling against that water. But you're also going to find more pictographs. But if you get an opportunity to go out to the other side, you'll find that I think it's a lot more terrain changes. There's a lot more to look at. And there's also some pretty big lakes, including Lake Brule, that will allow you to come in on one lake. And even though you're just on one lake, it is a huge lake, and there's plenty to explore the entire week without leaving that lake. But it also gives you opportunities to do a loop where you could start and end with your car at the same place. So that would take a huge amount of planning out of the responsibility of those leaders. I mean, you can imagine trying to get in at one spot on a river and trying to coordinate a pickup 20 miles later or 50 miles later on a different day, and you don't know what kind of weather you're going to be up against. You're not sure exactly what kind of physical capacity your team has. So there's just a lot more risk when you start adding more of those variables. And sometimes it's just easier to take that first trip in something that's known and something that allows you to do those loops and have those backup options.
Perfect. Did you guys have the bags and those kind of things for the trip before you went, or did you rent those from somewhere?
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with an A3 bag. It's something that we use in the military all the time. When you see soldiers getting ready to deploy, they've always got those giant bags. Oftentimes they got one in each hand. They make a civilian version of that bag that's got 2 backpack straps. And it is just about perfect for the amount of gear that you need to take to Boundary Waters. So if you find that you've got all your gear in a pile and you can't get in that bag, you probably have too much gear for a trip like this. So it put everybody on equal footing. We were able to watch Amazon over the course of like 7 months, and I think we paid an average of only like $28 a bag when we had budgeted 50 or 60. And that's just kind of how it goes with those bags. They go through ebbs and flows of the demand for them and what people are charging for them. But included in our budget was the fact that everybody was going to get one of these bags because we expected them to be able to pack into it.
Perfect. That's a big drawback of doing your own is, all right, having those bags you can put everything in, and have that small enough for you to put in the canoe, and not take too much, because you really don't need that much when you're, it's kind of like going to Philmont or going backpacking. you don't need as much as you think you might need.
What I've always thought was interesting is people talking about how the less you take, the happier you'll be.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And just to add on, I mean, we're talking about costs and timelines and all that, and I've actually got a copy of their how they were planning the trip to average costs and links and the whole 9 yards that anybody can take and use and go from there. So I will actually post that on the High Adventure Scouting website as a Boundary Waters individual Boundary Waters trip, and so you can download that anytime you want. So, all
As
right,
long as we're talking about money, if you do decide to go with an outfitter, expect to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $200 more per person, kind of depending on what did you choose. Did you choose the Kevlar boats? How many days did you go out? Those kind of things. But there's an awful lot of convenience that comes with just showing up and they hand you your stuff and point you in the direction, just allow you to go. There was a fair amount of checklists and stress making sure we had what we needed when we needed it.
exactly.
And we did put that together. We actually, looked at the website, the Outfitters website, the Webfitters outside, the Outfitters website. We looked at the website, looked at the prices, and actually did like a side-by-side spreadsheet, like going one way and going the other, and figuring out the differences. And went, it's more money, it's easier. It's more money, it's easier. And then decided, the things that were going to be easier were not that much easier, and they weren't things they were definitely things that we felt we were comfortable doing ourselves. And our troop does do. We've done backpacking before. We have quite a number of people who are really comfortable with using backpacking stoves and backpacking style events. So it wasn't a stretch to do something like this. Whereas if we had like no experience and nobody nobody had a backpacking stove and nobody knew what to do, it probably would have been more beneficial and would have been worth that extra money to lean on the outfitter for that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's an awful lot of people that have no experience in or very little experience in canoeing and those kind of areas that will go up, and those outfitters will do everything you want down to providing sleeping bags and tents and the whole 9 yards if you want to pay for it. So it just depends on how much you want it easy, you want to pay for it, or you want to bring your own stuff. So what kind of stoves did you guys take with you? Did you take the traditional white gas, or did you use isobutane canisters, or what did you do?
We took
just the isobutane. Go ahead.
We took mostly just the backpacking stoves, but I've done it both ways. My very first trip to the Boundary Waters was a family trip, and my father brought everything, including the kitchen sink. I mean, we had a watermelon with us on this trip, and we had a 25-pound propane tank because we weren't sure how much propane we were going to go through and stuff like that. So just, we were new. We didn't exactly know what we were doing. For crying out loud, I had disco beds with me. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. Those are those steel bunk beds that you might see at Philmont or Jamboree or some of those kind of activities. And
oh my gosh,
way wrong equipment. But that was 9 trips ago, and since then we've learned to cut the weight and cut how much you bring in. And yeah, all backpacking stoves for us.
Okay. Hey, when we went to the Boundary Waters in 2019, we had the traditional MSR stoves that we had, and fast forward a couple of years when we went to Philmont in 2021, we converted everything over to the isobutane canister stoves that we didn't have to worry about the white gas and the finicky nature of that. It just depends on what you're comfortable with, and we kind of try to train all of our scouts and our troop on both, but it's kind of we're getting away from the white gas now. It's just easier with the canisters. So
and safer. And
yes.
When you're that far from help, safety is one of those things you just got to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, even though white gas isn't that dangerous, but if we have a problem here, I can be at the ER in 25 minutes.
Oh yeah.
You have a problem up there, and we could be at the ER in 4 hours at the fastest.
I had one of my guys on our Boundary Waters trip, and I told him that white gas, it's very flammable. Don't get it near the fire if you're going to start a fire. And one of them did, and and it could have been very disastrous. And so I actually told that story at his Eagle Court of Honor, and he was embarrassed quite a bit. But like yeah, that was the only time I yelled on the whole trip. Like, put that down now. But you're right. You're right. It is a little safer, but again, everybody has their own area of comfort, and there's some people that are very passionate about either end. I teach both in my backpacking class, so.
As long as you're talking about cooking fuels, it's important to recognize, what type of cooking are you intending to do in Boundary Waters.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going light and lean, then you're probably doing 2 freeze-dried meals a day and then tortillas and peanut butter or something like that at lunch. So you're not really cooking. You're mostly just boiling water for coffee or to rehydrate a meal.
Right.
But if you start adding things like, I want to be able to wash my hair, or we're washing dishes, and those kind of things all take up warm water and start chewing up fuel. So my recommendation to anybody would be to, practice the way you're going to fight and take a scale with you and weigh the container before and after cooking, so you know exactly what to expect out of cooking something. Are you simmering something in a pan for 20 minutes? Or are you just bringing 1 cup of water to boiling and dumping it in a bag to seal it?
Exactly. We had way too much food, and for sure. So, and that leads me to the next thing is food. We were just talking about rehydrating food, and that's really what you're doing with the backpacking meals. You're not cooking anything. And what did you guys bring your own food with you, or did you take? Was that part of the outfitter package that you took?
The outfitter offered food, but we ended up taking our own. It allowed us to kind of break ourselves up into 4 different groups. So we had 2 9-person teams, and then of course each team had a group of adults and had a group of youth. So there wasn't any need for all of us to be on the same menu, and that gave the youth a lot of freedom to be able to set up a menu that they liked and didn't necessarily agree with the adults. So we gave them as much freedom as we possibly could. We even created a Google document when we started menu planning, and it would bring up a picture of every Mountain House meal there was, and the kids would select yes or no. And that all went into a spreadsheet that's automatically done by Google. It wasn't even hard for us to do. And we were able to take all that information and sort it by the team so they could look and say, oh, look, absolutely nobody likes oatmeal. Maybe we shouldn't bring any oatmeal with us.
Which was not the case. We ate a lot of oatmeal, but
You did mention extra food, though, and if you're doing Boundary Waters right, you should be coming home with extra food.
Yeah.
I've seen people do the granola trip where they left with just enough calories to physically survive the trip, and I'd like to think that me and my Snickers bar had a little bit more fun than they did. So.
Well, with a trip like the Boundary Waters, you're not carrying everything on your back like you do on a backpacking trip all the time. Now, when you're portaging, obviously you will, but you're not generally going that far. So I think our food bag, the guy that carried that, it was over 100 pounds. It was heavy. And my son decided to carry the canoe for them. And we thought, okay, that looks heavy. Oh, no, it was a Kevlar canoe. He had the easiest job in the world. And
once you get used to it, it's not that bad.
Exactly. It was a little hard to navigate sometimes, but for sure, yeah. Well, that's interesting. I've seen some outfitters that will have meal plans that you can, kind of like they do at some of the BSA high adventure bases, and they just give you all the food and you pay for it. And I've known other groups that have done bare bones and brought the food that they wanted. With this kind of trip, you can get a little more creative if you want to and actually cook, and you'll have plenty of time.
And we did.
Yeah.
And we did. We actually took our crew took potatoes, those bags of mini potatoes. Yeah. We took potatoes, carrots, and onions, and a little thing of oil, and some folded up aluminum foil. And we actually had foil packet meals on the campfire on the second night.
Oh, perfect.
We didn't want to wait to, like 4 nights in, because there's a good chance that the produce would start going bad. But
sure,
those were all pieces of produce that you didn't have to refrigerate, and they actually survived really well and made a really good meal. And then on the 4th morning, we actually had pancakes.
Awesome. Yeah.
We took tiny little, 9-inch fry pans that we used on top of the butane or the isobutane burners, and just made one pancake at a time, or two because we took two of them. But yeah,
Well, you probably had plenty of time, so
we did.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, and that leads me to the next question. Is we talked a little bit off recording about how you guys did this trip a little different than a lot of Boundary Waters trips where they're going from campsite to campsite to campsite, which that's the way we did it. I want you to tell you how you guys did your trip and how it's been different than other trips that you might have taken.
So one of the first options that we gave the youth when we kind of got out these maps and laid them out in front of them, and of course they have no idea about the scale or what we're doing. So some of them are drawn 250-mile routes that we're going to do that are just totally unachievable. But you say, hey, look, you kind of got a choice. Do you want to cover 5, 10, 20 miles every day, and then we'll keep going? We'll set up camp and then tear it down the next morning? Or do you want to do something called base camping, where you come in and you find that Cadillac 5-star site, you put up everything, and now you're light and lean, and you can travel incredible distances in a day and know that you're returning home to your tent and everything's set up ready to go for you. So I think that's what both crews ended up doing, is doing a base camp style.
That's cool. I've never heard anybody do that, and that's a neat way of doing things.
Pretty
It
much
worked out
every
really nicely.
pretty much every trip that I've taken to Boundary Waters, and this one with Troop 40 was my 9th trip to Boundary Waters. We've done camping like that with a base camp. I've done a few where we did a route and we were really trying to cover some mileage. I think the record I did was like 55 miles in one trip. But for these scouts, that wasn't necessarily something that we wanted to try on the first trip. It definitely allows you to fill all the hours of the day because you're going to be working all day to make some of those mileage goals. But at the same time, you're missing out on opportunities to go fishing or exploring or just sit in your campsite. And we had kids that did a D&D campaign while we were in Boundary Waters. So they had done all their prep work for it ahead of time. They had printed stuff from the internet that they needed to refer to, but obviously we're not going to have internet connection out in the woods.
Right.
And they had themselves a D&D campaign, and it was absolutely amazing to listen to them having fun in the woods with no cell phones going off, no music, just no distractions.
Yeah, it's a very strange sort of thing when you don't have your access to your phone. And myself and the other adult leader when we were up there a couple of years ago, we wanted to look up the water filtration that Northern Tier uses, and we thought, well, yeah, well, let's look it up on Amazon, and we both reached for our phones, and we didn't have our phones with us, and so it's just so ingrained in you. And when you take 5, 6, 7 days out in the wilderness with no access, it's liberating because you forget about all the stuff that you don't ever think about, and you're kind of forced to do that because you don't have that crutch of the phone sitting there reading it. So over the past couple of years since I developed this website and eventually this podcast, I found all kinds of awesome resources online that really helped myself and our scouts and scouters on some of our trips. A couple of friends that I've developed over the last couple of years. One is Jeff Kress. He has a great website called gear-report.com where he has all kinds of information on Philmont and backpacking and other resources that really will kind of help spearhead your trip and give you some really good ideas. The other is Andy Parrish, and he has a YouTube channel called Andy Parrish Outdoors. I personally used, before I ever even knew Andy, I used this resource for getting ready for our Philmont treks. And great resource, great gear reviews, lots of interesting information, and he's genuinely a pretty down to earth guy. So both of those resources are great. There are others that I use, but those are two scouter friends of mine that recommend highly. So check out gear-report.com and go on YouTube and check out Andy Parrish Outdoors. That's cool. That's cool.
One of the strangest parts of Boundary Waters is coming down the hill as you've left and you're in a vehicle and you're going faster than 15 miles an hour for the first time in a week.
Yeah.
And the wind's in your hair and there's Snickers in the car and cell phones are dinging like crazy because you missed 318 emails.
Exactly.
One
Yep.
of the other advantages you were talking about doing a loop versus doing a base camp option, especially when you're traveling with a new group of scouts, you usually do something called double portaging. So when we paddle across that first lake, you're going to load up half of your gear and walk it across to the other end. And you set your stuff down by the lake and you're going to walk back empty-handed on that second trip. So you end up making 2 loaded trips and you're actually walking across that trail a total of 3 times. So that chews up a lot of time, but it really cuts down the amount of work and it lets you bring things like hammocks and extra food and chairs. Some of those things that you really would have had to trim if you were going to try to make that in a single portage. But
Right.
now that we've set up a base camp, we were able to do single portaging across all of our stuff because all we brought with us was lunch and fishing poles. So in a single day, we were able to cover 22 miles and end up right back where we started. And we never saw the same lake twice.
That's cool. Were you able to get fairly close to that base camp that first day, or did you have a pretty good first day to get there?
All right. So here we are. It's the middle of January, and Wes sends me a text message double checking his permit details before he goes ahead and clicks pay. And I was pretty impressed because it was opening day, but it was also a snow day here in the St. Louis area. And I was outside playing with my kids. So I shot him a text message back. Yeah, good job. You got everything right. Go ahead and confirm it. He said, did you get yours yet? Yeah. I'll get it in an hour or 2 when I go inside. You know, the kids and I are throwing snowballs at each other. We're having fun. Within that 2 hours, when I got back inside, there were only 3 permits for our entry point for that day. Wes got one of them, and another scout group got the other 2.
Oh my gosh.
So instead of coming in on a portage that, I don't know, had 100 rods or something like that, and a rod is the length of a canoe, we got to come in on this death march. It was like 258 rods of nothing but rocky fun to remind you what ankles are.
Oh my gosh.
So, we had a couple of members of my group that wanted to thank me personally for that opportunity to experience a new portage.
Oh my gosh.
But that's kind of the luck of the draw. And you got to be ready with those kind of plans. By this point, we had collected money from parents. We had signed contracts. We had dates that we agreed that were coming and going on. We couldn't just shift it to the next day or the next week because, I was outside throwing snowballs when I should have been getting a permit inside.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to those deadlines on that stuff because they go quickly. So
apparently the good ones do.
Oh my gosh.
But that's all right. The other thing it did for us is when you're in Boundary Waters, even if you know somebody else who's not in your 9-person party, you're not allowed to see them. So during our day trip, we actually ended up paddling right past Wes's campsite. And we stayed out, 100 feet in the water. And we waved at him and we told 30-second stories as we paddled past. But that was it. You got to keep moving. They don't want big congregations of, 100 people getting together and having a party. It's not what Boundary Waters is for.
Exactly. So the like we were talking about the kind of the base camp approach. You can obviously you can go and visit different places during the day, but you're at the same place. The trip we took, and you've probably taken in past, Greg, as you're going from one to the next and to the next each day, and getting to see different campsites and different scenery. So it depends on what the group wants to do and what they're interested in. I like both approaches, and I'd never heard doing a base camp, so that's kind of cool.
It's important to remember that this isn't the Holiday Inn by Hilton. So even though you have a guaranteed entry point and a guaranteed entry day, those website or the campsites themselves are not reservable.
That's
That's
right.
first come, first serve.
Yeah.
So you might have your eye on that 5-star site on an island, with the perfect swimming hole, and you could end up on the other side in the buggy bog where, there's no breeze and barely any room for tents. And if you got a group of 9 people, tent pads are pretty important.
Yeah, we had something like that. There was an island like that, right almost on the Canadian border, and we went to one end of it, and there was already a group there, and we'd kind of gone past. There were 2 campsites on this island, and so we went back to the other one and stayed there, and it ended up being great. But that other campsite bisected the Canadian border was on the north end, and the U.S. border was on the south end of the island. It was a real small island, but we thought that would be very cool to camp on the border. But
Yep.
we were close. We didn't get there, but yeah,
I'm
that's
glad you brought up Quetico and the Canadian side. It's important when you're planning those kind of trips to realize that Quetico is the Canadian side, and there's different rules and there's different
right.
permits and things that you have to pay attention to. You need to be aware that at customs, you might need to be able to provide proof that both parents have given permission for you as a scout leader, not their legal guardian, to take them out of the country, because that's what you're doing.
Right.
So you need to make sure you've got all those permits and paperwork and all the signatures you need done ahead of time, because that's a awkward place to figure out that 8 out of 9 folks are allowed to cross the border. What do you do with the 9th one when the officials are saying no?
Exactly. And going to Canada is a much more difficult than it used to be, and it's a lot easier to stay in the U.S.
The Canadian side's a little bit more expensive. They got
Right.
some different rules on your fishing. Like they don't allow barbed hooks over there. So you could take a US hook and just crimp down that little barb at the end and still use it, or you got to buy specific barbs from that side.
Interesting. Yeah. Those are things to be aware of for sure. Absolutely. I would say if if this is just my opinion, but if you're taking this kind of trip for the first time as a troop or another youth related group, is start small. Stay in the
Yep.
U.S. first and then expand from there. It's a little easier, I would think, that way. But
Yeah, if your team has got no experience, there is absolutely nothing wrong with using an outfitter. That's why they exist. That's what they're
exactly,
there to do, is to service you and take care of you and make sure you've got the gear to get this done.
exactly.
But if, on the other hand, you're just kind of cheap and you're trying to be thrifty and save some money, that is one of the areas where you could cut out a couple of bucks.
That's true. That's exactly right. And
I'll tell you what, though, there's 2 things from an outfitter I will always use on a trip like this for scouts from now on. One is the canoes, just you've got to for the weight.
yeah,
And 2, the bunk rooms.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So a lot of outfitters will have a bunk room that'll handle up to 9 people, and they charge $20 a head usually, and it often comes with access to a bathroom or even a bathroom and shower in your bunk room. So we got so lucky with our signups in Troop 40. We ended up with 9 adults and 9 youth. And they put us in the bunkhouse, 2 rooms right next to each other. So youth protection wasn't a problem. The kids were one wall away. They could bang on the wall and ask whatever questions they wanted. And they had their shower, we had ours. But for $20 a night, oh my gosh, I wish I'd have known about that earlier for some of my other trips. And I would have used an outfitter for those options and some of my family trips.
Exactly. Now, what outfitter did you guys use? I like to. I'll provide information on this outfitter also, but it's different than the ones I've heard of before. So
We used Rockwood Outfitting.
okay.
And these guys have cabins right there on the lake that you could rent if you're interested. They did have Wi-Fi at the cabin. So the lake where the outfitter is technically outside of Boundary Waters. It's one lake outside. So you paddle across that lake, and then there's your welcome sign as you come across the Gunflint Trail and you're into the Boundary Waters. But I really liked them. They did a great job. They're very knowledgeable. They had everything we needed. They also rented satellite communicators. So we did take a satellite messenger for each team into the Boundary Waters, and we selected one of the moms who was staying behind to be our central point of contact. So every evening we would just send a message basically saying we're not dead. And this messenger would send a link to that parent. And if they tapped on that at the end of the text message, it brought up a dot on the map of where that message was sent from. So you're not stuck spending 3 hours trying to describe, we're on Poplar Lake at the south end next to the, no. Just bloop, here's the dot. And, checking in, we did 15 miles today. Everybody's happy. Talk to you tomorrow.
My oldest nephew took a through hike on the AT Appalachian Trail this year, and he had a communicator like that. So he would, whenever he stopped, he would kind of pinpoint it, and the grandparents had access to it, so they were happy. They got to see where their grandson was at all times, and they could send him messages. And I'm not sure he was thrilled to let everybody know where he was at, except for his parents. But but that's always good for moms and dads back home to know that, because I don't think we've ever had one of those on our trips, and I have a feeling my wife would want that I'm not going to tell her that exists. So
It's important to come up with a plan for what you're going to do if you do have a satellite communicator. You know, the parent at home needs to realize just because you're an hour late on the message doesn't mean let's call 911.
exactly.
You got to come up with a plan. You know, has it been 24 hours since I heard from you, or 48? You know, what's our window here? But it also gave families back at home an avenue to send a message north. So then we had to talk about, well, what do we do if, you know, little Timmy's grandma died? Are we going to tell him right away? Are we going to tell him at the end of the trip? Same situation, but maybe it was their dog. You know, just certain things don't need to be shared right away, but certain things do. And those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure you talked about with your team ahead of time so that you know what you're going to do. I mean, obviously you can't cover every possible scenario, but
Oh yeah, that's impossible. You'll make yourself crazy. Start doing that. So let's. I don't want you to go into real detail about all the things that you budgeted. I'll have that on the sheet that you sent me, Greg. But overall, what did you guys charge initially, and what did you end up um, costing per person on this trip? And you had two groups of 9, so that'd be 18.
yep. But we didn't know we were going to have 18 when we started. So when you get to that full group of 9, you've got a lot of savings there because you filled your cars and you filled the boats and stuff. So when we initially presented this to the committee, it was based on 7, 8, or 9 slots in a team. And then once we had broken into a second team, we got 12 names. Okay, well, we can divide that into 6 and 6. So at 12, we're committed to sending 2 teams, and we were able to move forward from there. You're talking budget. You need about $120 for the permits for 9 people. We budgeted for $5 a gallon gas because you never know what's going to happen to gas in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
But we planned on a 1,600-mile round trip, and we paid for the gas for every driver's car. So each team had 2 vehicles to take you. One of the vehicles ended up pulling the trailer as well, so we were able to take a V-nose trailer with us and keep the gas lower with that. For your food and Boundary Waters, you basically got to count on about $20 per person per day, and that's because freeze-dried meals are just expensive. Freeze-dried and packaged is most of what you're doing. One of the things you can do to really help your budget is limit yourself to no more than 2 freeze-dried meals in a day, and that does 2 major things for you. One, it cuts out one of those $11 meals that 2 people would have been sharing. And 2, it cuts down a massive amount of salt that your scouts are going to be taking in. If you eat 3 freeze-dried meals in a day, you're probably eating 3 days worth of salt.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a whole lot of water, and that's a big toll on your body to wash all that out. So it was important to us to limit ourselves to 2 of those meals and then try to find something else that was as close to from scratch as we could do while still, not requiring refrigeration and those kind of things.
Right. And the salt content, if you're backpacking, you're expending a whole lot of sweat, which, that's salt, and you need to add that back in. So it's not as big a deal when you're doing that. You're not exerting yourself quite the same way in a canoe. You are, but it's a different sort of thing. So that's a good point to make. So
one of the things that kind of surprised me is, I was thinking, well, how much do we need for traveling stops when we're stopping at McDonald's to get a burger? And right away I'm thinking, a number 2 at McDonald's, $4.95, right? A number 2 at McDonald's hasn't been $4.95 in a long time. So
wrong.
When we started looking at the numbers, the initial budget, I think I had $7 or $8 per food stop. And it just, once you realize that they're going to be paying taxes, and some of those scouts need another burger on top of a meal just to fill up. They are growing.
Yeah.
So what we ended up settling on was anywhere from $10 to $15 a person would probably work. But we decided on $15 a person, because what that did is it allowed the scouts to have that leftover money so that when we stopped at a gas station to get gas, they had $2 to get a soda, or they had $5 at the rock shop to get some cool trinket keepsake to bring home to mom and dad or whatever. But it was just easier and a lot more independent for the scouts. They thought it was pretty cool. Every time we stopped for food, they got a paper envelope with their name on it. They opened it up and there was cash inside, and it was theirs. So if you're not hungry at all, so be it. We obviously have adults keeping an eye on people and making sure everybody's okay. But, you were allowed to choose what you wanted. And we tried to stop at malls and things with food courts so that people would have multiple options on what they wanted to spend their money on.
Well, if you're going through Wisconsin, you've got to get, cheese curds. So you've got to save money for
Oh,
that.
we did get.
Oh, that happened. A lot of that happened.
That's some of my. That was my favorite stop in Wisconsin, and the other adult that went with me, he's from Wisconsin, so he was in heaven because he was showing me all this stuff, and he tried to convert me to a cheesehead, and like, no, I'll eat the cheese, but I'm not going that far. So, but well, that's cool. So you budgeted around $650 total. What did you guys end up spending per person?
We were able to give back a refund of over $160 per person, so it came in at just under $500 a person for that trip.
That's really good. That's about where a lot of the council high adventure bases are, between $500 and $650, that range, and that falls right into where most of them are. And that's a good price point for a high adventure trip, especially you're looking at basically a week on
Yep.
on the Boundary Waters, and I assume you probably took, I didn't look at all the dates, but probably 9 days or so, 9 or 10 days.
Yep.
So basically, yeah, 2 weekends plus the week in the middle. So we spent the weekends doing our travel and the week in the middle basically in Boundary Waters.
And that's a great way to look at a high adventure trip. You just take, for adults that have vacation days, that you only have to take a week of vacation. That kind of cuts. That makes the people at home happier, as you can take them on a vacation, and at least it would be in my house. I don't know about your house, but that would make my wife happier. So, but
when you're setting up the days, it's important to look at your timing too. A lot of people will start, a weekend camp out on a Friday evening, but if you stop and think about it, some of those folks are going to get off work. Maybe they got off work at noon, but now they're scrambling and trying to find their shoes and their socks and get everything into a bag so that they can meet you and get on the road. We decided to just meet for lunch on Saturday. So that way, Friday night, we kind of had it reserved to do a bag drag if we felt it was necessary. And maybe it turns out it's just certain individuals that need that extra guidance. But it turned out we had great teams. Everybody was good to go. Nobody needed an extra Friday guidance. And that really allowed Wes and I to double check ourselves and make sure we had the team gear necessary to get this thing going. But then we were able to meet the next day and start fresh without anybody stressed or worried about where their gear is.
that sounds perfect. That's kind of the way we've done a lot of our trips in our troop. We'll leave, depending on, we'll leave like in a early morning of one morning, either Friday or Saturday morning, and that way, I don't like leaving. That'd be like a regular troop camp out, leaving on Friday at 4:35, 5:30, getting there. It's dark. It's just easier to drive during the day for those.
You're asking for a lot of trouble on that. Yeah.
Exactly. So, well, I've got a document that was sent to me that by these guys. It has the kind of the timeline of what to do and when to do it, based on their trip, budget with a lot of different things in it, kind of their flyer that they use. That's hey, with their name, each person's name, what they're responsible for with the parent initials. That's important. I do something like that for every one of our trips. It's not legally binding, but it tells people this is what you're expected to do. A Boundary Waters checklist for packing, traveling days checklist, tips and tricks, kind of a schedule. It's pretty extensive, and I would expect nothing more from Greg and Wes to put this stuff together, because they're very organized, and that's what I've seen on all the stuff I've seen them do throughout the years. So what else have we left out? Is there anything we haven't covered that you guys thought would be important for a trip like that?
I just want to be able to tell people that, before they get disheartened if they try to set up their own budget, I do need to confess that my father lives at the halfway point to Boundary Waters. So he was able to provide a house where he threw us a burger burn when we arrived on Saturday. He was also able to make breakfast for us so that before we left on Sunday. The house was big enough we were able to put the youth on the first floor and all the adults were on the second floor. So that helped, and we were able to meet youth protection that way. And not everyone's going to have that, but there are a lot of opportunities to team up with a church or a nonprofit organization or a scout camp and maybe trade a little labor for some the rights to spend the night there. But anything you can do to keep those costs low and eliminate the cost of a hotel is going to really help your budget.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of people are coming from a lot further away. They'll fly into Minneapolis, St. Paul, and either drive or rent a car or something like that. So your costs will be a little bit more for stuff like that. If you have a big enough group, you can spread that over the group. But those are things to keep in mind. Where we are at in the St. Louis area, it's about a 2-day trip up there. So, but if you're driving in like that, again, look for community organizations or churches or somewhere that you can stay. If you want to spend a little money and don't want everybody to be spread out through hotel rooms, there's always Airbnb and those kind of places that rent houses for the night. You can always look at those other options also. So there's plenty of things to go on with that. So.
Also, don't forget, Boundary Waters is amazing, but you're spending 4 days traveling. Make that part of the trip. You've got adults that need to be rotated out on driving. I mean, there's nothing worse than staring at Illinois highway for 4 hours and you barely have to touch the steering wheel because you're just driving exactly straight north. And there's stretches like that in the other states you'll be going through too. So stop at those parks that you're going by. Make a plan to stop at a rock shop or some kind of trinket shop. Give the kids an opportunity to find that little trinket that's going to help them remember this trip.
Exactly. And do it before you get past I'm trying to think what I think it's Duluth, Minnesota. There's not much between Duluth and the Boundary Waters. So you're going to do, we stopped at Lake Superior and kind of looked at it and, it was big, did some other things, but do it before you get up there because there's not much beyond that point. So
I think it's important that the kids stop and at least touch that lake. I mean, you always hear stories about people who have flown all the way to California or Florida, and it's like, oh, how was the water? Oh, I don't know. I didn't touch it. Exactly. You went all the way to the ocean living in Illinois, and you didn't even touch the water?
Exactly. That's crazy. Yeah, definitely touch all the water. That's all.
That's right.
So. Well, listen, guys, I appreciate you taking the time out today and explaining your trip and kind of giving everybody an idea of how to do it. And again, I'm going to provide all that information on the highadventurescouting.com website. And again, I appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for getting the word out there. I mean, this is awesome that we're able to share these lessons learned and what we did right and what we did wrong with other people so that their trips can happen and can happen better.
Well, that's exactly why I started this website and the podcast, to give scouters more options that were beyond the big four high adventure bases. So now I want to thank Greg Gunyon and Wes Wexell from Troop 40 in Shiloh, Illinois for joining us today. Great information. As I mentioned, I'm going to post all their information that they sent about their trip at highadventurescouting.com. Thanks for joining us today, and remember to tell your friends about this podcast. You can find us online at highadventurescouting.com, on Facebook or Instagram. If you have any questions or ideas for future podcasts, just email us at info@highadventurescouting.com. This podcast and website are independent and not affiliated with any youth organization. Happy High Adventure! This has been a production of High Adventure Resources, 2019. All rights reserved.